Poor people are not happy. They don't have access to, to clean drinking water. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to shelter. So it's not that material things are not connected to happiness. They are to some degree. But once you get past a certain level of comfort, material things simply don't provide us happiness. At the same time, there is this giant propaganda system of advertising that is, again, perpetually telling us that the way to happiness is through objects. The way to happiness is through consumption. What makes people happy are things to do with society, with connection, with personal connection, with autonomy, with relaxation. In fact, when you ask people what it is that makes them happy, goods very rarely come into it. However, the problem is that capitalism has to sell goods. The marketplace provides goods, and therefore what it did was it took the images of the life that people really want, which is a life of meaning, of connection, of sociability, of friendship, of family, of intimacy, of sexuality. Those are the images that it took, and it linked them to objects. And so advertising is both true and false at the same time. If it was simply false, it wouldn't work. But advertising is true to the extent that it reflects our real desires.
As bizarre as it may sound for people who dream of fantastic wealth as a cure for unhappiness, the same holds for the wealthy. Beyond a certain level of material comfort, deprivation is relative.
At the bottom level, sure, it's $5 million to $10 million a year. But once you've got 5 or 10 million, that doesn't seem like enough, because you're associated with people who have 15 or 20. And when you get 15 or 20, then it's 50 and 100. And you wind up never feeling as if you have enough. And in fact, people really never even thought of themselves as rich, even when they were colossally rich, because of this phenomenon that psychologists call relative deprivation. They were comparing themselves not with you and me, but with each other in this little world that they'd come to inhabit.
In his book, The Status Seekers, Vance Packard uses the phrase merchants of discontent to describe a deliberate strategy by advertisers of targeting the less affluent with status symbol messages. For someone with little chance of changing their social conditions in life, consumerism offers a quick fix that allows people to feel as though they are climbing the social hierarchy, when in fact, they are standing still. The strategy was particularly evident in mid-century automobile advertising. Studies found the people who lived in housing developments were more likely to park their cars outside of the garage than those who could afford more expensive homes. A typical example is this advertisement from Plymouth. It reads, "We're not wealthy, we just look it." The American way of life would be characterized by a myth which would seem to make political activism unnecessary. In the new democracy of material goods, there were an infinite number of possessions to be purchased by rich and poor alike. There was no need to change institutions because the system was already perfect. It was called the American Dream, and happiness was just one possession away.
Our young adults, and the shopping centers are built in their image. Selling to young adults demands a new kind of marketing. For these young adults, the shopping centers have built fountains, commissioned statues, put in restaurants, and freestanding stairways. They've included banks, loan offices, rental plans, plant nurseries, and places to buy building materials. The shopping centers see these young adults as people whose homes are always in need of expansion. People who buy in large quantities and truck it away in their cars. It's a big market.
In the tinsel and glitter world of Beverly Hills, superstars reign supreme in million-dollar mansions that hold a weird fascination for everyone else. Visitors rubberneck for hours just for a glimpse through the guarded gates. But for one man already on the ladder to superstardom, just a look wasn't enough. For him, it was love at first sight.
we just had, at the time of this filming, it was just a few days ago, there was an incident at a Walmart in Long Island the day after Thanksgiving, where basically people were lining up for a sale, 5 in the morning, and one of the workers there was crushed to death, was actually trampled to death by these shoppers. And when the ambulance arrived or whatever it was to take the poor guy to the morgue or the hospital or wherever they're going to take, they didn't want to get out of the way. They said, we've been waiting here for 5 in the morning. I'm not leaving. So that would be the consumer society at its finest. And oddly enough, exactly to the day 5 years ago, on that day, day after Thanksgiving, the same thing happened at a Walmart in Orlando. It was not a worker, it was a woman who was shopping there. And she wasn't killed, but she was trampled unconscious, and people wouldn't get out of the way for the medics to take her away. So when you get finally to that point, this is what Marcuse was talking about, and the whole idea of one-dimensional man and so on, was this tremendous emptiness again. And so I'm going to buy things to fill that emptiness up. And then we see the religious power of it, because if the medics arrive basically to take the corpse away or the body to the hospital, and you're not going to get out of the way because you're going to save $50 on a DVD player, that suggests something has gone fundamentally wrong.
Everybody's looking restless. Oh, that's an 8-minute countdown! I slapped you in the face. What is going on?
I think there's not much difference between assuaging your anxiety by buying things and investing in the American dream. They seem to go hand in hand.
The American dream is a story about how society works. The American dream says that if you work hard, you will succeed.
You know, the bedrock of our economic success is the American dream. It's a dream shared in big cities and small towns across races, regions, and religions, that if you work hard, you can support a family. That if you get sick, there will be health care that you can afford. That you can retire. That you can retire with the dignity and security and respect that you've earned. That your children can get a good education and young people can go to college even if they don't come from a wealthy family.
And so he says we may start off with different positions. There are people who are rich and there are people who are poor, and they're born into different kind of contexts, but the playing field is level. That's the dream. That's the dream of, you know, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. The problem with that is actually at odds with how social mobility works. Social mobility actually is much more based upon class and upon the resources that you have available to you into which you're born.
Hi, I'm Paris Hilton, and you're here for the fit on MySpace. Let's go check out my shoe closet first. So, welcome to my shoe closet. As you can tell, I really love shoes.
Part of those are material resources, and part of those are also cultural resources as well. There are class structures that keep people mostly in their places. There are some slight exceptions to this where there's movement between, you know, one rung and another, but the level of social mobility is remarkably low in the society. And then the American dream is punctuated by these very visible examples in the media that show us people who are poor who are now rich. And now the question is, if those people are rich, if those people have made it, and a vast majority of the people have not, and the major thing that separates them is their own hard work, then the reason that the vast majority of people are where they are is because that is where they deserve to be. You didn't work hard enough. You're not intelligent enough.
The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Some are smart, some not. Some are successful, some not.
The United States never had mass prosperity throughout its history. It was just a period from 1946 to 1980 where the prosperity was really, it looked like it was just going better and better and better for everybody. And that came after World War II, with the backlog of tremendous earnings from war industry and such. The GI Bill that came in that developed a whole new big professional class and the like. And that lasted till about 1980. Since then, there have been cutbacks to human services, cutbacks in educational opportunities, and greater inequality. Since 2000 to 2008, the inequality between the very rich and the rest of us, that inequality is greater than it's been throughout the 20th century. So we're back to like 1900 in terms of inequality. Everybody just can't make it. Throughout history, the rich have always argued that the poor are the authors of their own poverty. They're poor because they're stupid, they're disreputable, they're hopeless. People are poor because they are paid less than the value that they produce. You need poverty. Poverty is needed if you're going to have wealth. The only way a rich slaveholder, a Roman senator, or antebellum plantation owner in the South, the only way they can live in this fabulously luxurious mode is by having slaves who work from the crack of dawn down into the night. That's expropriation. That's creating the poverty of the slave or the serf or the worker so that the slaveholder or the lord, the feudal lord, or the plutocrat, the capitalist, can really accumulate wealth.
The idea that human happiness is connected to the immense accumulation of commodities. I think that idea is what is driving development in what we used to call the developed world, is driving development in China, is driving development in India. I think it will increasingly drive development in Africa as well. I think we're starting to see the results of what that means for the planet, when not only the 5% of the American population strives for that, but when increasingly the rest of the world also is bought into that, and you then have to provide the goods and the energy that those goods takes to produce, we're arriving at the kind of exhaustion of the physical planet. The ancient philosopher Confucius, he was asked what he would do if he were ever to rule the state. Someone said, okay, you're in charge of the state, what would you do? And he said a very interesting thing. He said he would, quote, rectify the language. And I think if he was asked that in the modern age, he would say, let me control the media. If you can control the stories, you don't need to have soldiers on street corners to control them. You can control people in their own heads, in their own imaginations. On the one hand, it's really depressing because it's like, how do you then get out of it? Because there's no way you can have control of the media. There's no way you can compete with these stories that are told thousands of times a day through advertising, through programming, through newspapers, through the internet now, through video games, through all kinds of ways. At the same time, the reason I'm hopeful, the reason actually gives me some optimism is that capitalism has to do that. That unless it does that, they know that things will fall apart. So capitalism in that sense is like a house of cards. A house of cards, it has to be constantly held together. We have to be told every single day what this story is. And they have to do it every day because it's unnatural. If it was natural, they wouldn't have to do it. And if they stop, they know that in fact it would fall apart. That actually is the great hope for me. Is in fact the amount of time they have to spend convincing us about the value of this society is in fact what gives me hope that that there's an alternative just below the surface, and that alternative is much more human, much more compassionate, is much more connected to concern for other people, is much more connected to concern for the planet, and that it's being held down by this incredible and relentless propaganda system.